This week, Conflict Zone is in Berlin, where we caught up with one of West Africa's most influential leaders. He's John Mahama, president of Ghana, lauded by the West for maintaining a stable democracy in an otherwise volatile region. But when you look at the facts, is that reputation really justified? President John Mahama, very warm welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Tim.
Let me start with human rights, a subject that you've drawn attention to many times in the past. July last year at an African summit, you and other leaders unanimously voted yourselves immunity from prosecution at a new African Court of Justice and Human Rights due to be set up in the future. Why did you take what Amnesty International called a backward step in the fight against impunity?
Well, I think that it was a matter that was quite well debated in the summit, and Ghana as a country is a signature to the Rome Statute, and so we support the work of the International Criminal Court.
Yes, well, this went right against the ICC, didn't it? The International Criminal Court.
It was in the particular case of Kenya, in a situation where an election had been held and people had been elected by the people, by the electorate. And so they had gotten an endorsement by the electorate to govern. And so we had a strange situation where the people had given a mandate to...
this is in Kenya?
Yeah, in Kenya, to Uhuru and Ruto to rule. And at the same time, ICC said, no, we need you because we want to prosecute you for crimes against humanity. And that created, you know, quite a problem.
But the amendment that you passed bars the court from prosecuting sitting African leaders and senior officials. So it's a carte blanche for the VIP to do all the murdering and torturing that they want to do. You put yourself above the law.
No, not really. I believe
not really. It's in black and white, the amendment.
I believe that if people are guilty of crimes against humanity, they must be prosecuted.
Whether they're sitting leaders or not?
No, if they are sitting leaders, it depends on the circumstances. This is a situation in which post what they were accused of, the country had gone to elections and elected these people as the leaders. And the criminal court wanted to try them. And that was what created the difficulty.
Yes, but your amendment is for the future, for all VIPs, for all sitting leaders and senior officials in the future. You weren't passing judgment on one event in Kenya.
Kenya was the situation that created what the African Union Summit discussed. Of course, there had been the case of Omar Bashir, against whom a warrant has been served, and many times the court has tried to arrest him and try him. But even before that,
South Africa failed to execute the warrant.
Yeah, because the African Union had granted immunity because of the conference. You can't have leaders coming to discuss in a summit and a court, you know, chasing leaders with, you know, I mean, they are guests of the South African state.
Yeah, but you can't be party to the ICC and pick and choose which bits of it you're going to support.
The African Union is our continental body, and if it is holding a summit in your country, it needs a certain immunity to allow people to come in and have a discussion. You don't go arresting them when they have come on the auspices of the African Union. That was not acceptable.
You are required to comply with the rulings of the ICC, whether that person is given immunity locally or not. You are required. Fatou Bensouda, the ICC chief prosecutor, says the South Africans were in breach of their binding international commitments.
There's a disagreement there between the African Union and the ICC. These are two recognized international organizations. You cannot take the ICC's opinion over the African Union. But I do believe in justice.
So withdraw from the ICC then if you're not prepared to respect the commitments.
The ICC is useful, and several African leaders
are useful for show, or because you can pick and choose your commitments?
Charles Taylor is there. Just recently, Hissène Habré has started to be tried in Senegal. And so there are examples where people have been brought to justice. And I think that the ICC is still relevant and is still important in terms of investigating and prosecuting cases of crimes against humanity.
But commitments are just things to respect when you like them and you dump them when you don't.
You need to weigh the ICC's, warrants against the decision of a people. The whole of Kenya voted these people into office.
Well, Fatou Bensouda doesn't agree with you on this.
Well, that's Fatou against
these are binding international commitments that you signed up to.
That's Fatou against the whole of the Kenyan people.
But all the cases were either self-referred or referred by the Security Council with African support. 3 of the cases now under investigation were self-referred. 2 were referred by the Security Council with African support.
Yeah, that's right. Currently,
so what's the complaint about the ICC?
Well, Africa has made its concerns known to the international community and to the ICC.
Wouldn't it be more honest to withdraw from the ICC?
I don't think so.
Withdraw from it. Because you're not prepared to obey its ruling.
The ICC serves a purpose. I think that's why we are members of the Rome Statute, and I think the ICC has a relevance. But I guess that what should happen is we must take on board the concerns of Africa. Africa feels targeted, rightly or wrongly. It's like only African leaders are being arraigned before the ICC. And so Africa feels
with
targeted.
African support. With African
Fantastic.
support.
But some concerns have been raised by the African Union. And I think that the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and the AU should dialogue and find out how they take on board the concerns raised by Africa.
You were asked this year when you visited the Gambia to raise the issue of the appalling human rights record there. Why didn't you when you were in the Gambia?
I was in the Gambia to participate in the 50th anniversary celebration. And I went as head of the ECOWAS. And that was the simple reason for which I went there.
But the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, Amnesty International, Media Foundation for West Africa, all asked you to raise the case of human rights, which has been under attack for many years in the Gambia.
I did not have any official role. And so I didn't speak in any forum. I was just a guest. Of course, I had private discussions with President Yahya Jammeh, but...
Did you raise what Amnesty International said when it said freedom remains an illusion for most Gambians, particularly journalists and human rights activists who live in fear of arbitrary arrest, torture, incommunicado detention, unfair trials, rape? You didn't raise any of that.
It would be unfair on my part to disclose a private conversation with another African leader. I don't think
do you care about these things?
I care about them.
But not enough to speak out in public about them?
You don't know if I spoke about them, but I say it's unfair for me to disclose what we spoke about.
President Mahama, your government is often touted as the most stable democracy in West Africa, the commitment to transparency and accountable government. Why have Ghanaians been waiting 10 years to get a right to information law, a legal right to access information? Why is it taking so long?
I don't think that it changes the sense of free expression and the very vibrant media landscape that Ghana has. It's taking unduly long, I agree with you, and my government is fast-tracking it as quickly as possible. Indeed, the government of President Atta Mills, of which I was vice president, is the government that submitted it finally to Parliament for approval. Before then, it had gone through varying processes of consultation. And so it's been with Parliament unduly long. The life of that Parliament expired. And so this Parliament has taken it up. And I believe that before this Parliament rises, the Right to Information Bill will be passed. But let me say...
Some 80 NGOs have criticized the draft. They say it's too opaque, it's untransparent, there's a lack of independent oversight, and the broad exemptions on information risk making this toothless.
Indeed, that is what has delayed it. There's not been consensus on what the scope of exemptions should be. And so it's gone back and forth. I believe that people are quite satisfied with what we have. It's a starting point. And if we need to tweak it a bit in the future, we can always make an amendment to the Act. But let me say that in Ghana, there are many guarantees of free speech and independent media. One of the best is Chapter 12 of our Constitution that guarantees a free and independent media.
So you've nothing to hide. You're telling me
there's nothing.
You've nothing to hide.
I don't think that the Right to Information Bill would transform Ghana's independent media landscape in any dramatic manner. We have that freedom already. Our people have absolutely no problem expressing themselves in the media. The media has the freedom to investigate anything it wants. And so the Freedom of Information Bill will only enhance freedoms that they have already. And so we hope it will be passed.
Well, it means a lot to 80 NGOs who've been campaigning for the last 10 years.
Yes, they've been campaigning and it's going through the process. I'm sure Parliament will pass it before the life of this Parliament is over. And when that is done, the media and researchers and anybody who wants to take advantage of it can do so.
When you took over in Ghana, you promised to build a strong and resilient economy. Instead, you've presided over a steadily worsening economy. Growth has slowed dramatically. It's down from 9% in 2011. It's expected to be 3.9% this year, according to the OECD. Last July, Ghana's Trade Union Congress held a nationwide demonstration, issued you an ultimatum: address the widespread perceived corruption in the country and halt the depreciation of the currency. Why isn't that happening?
The economy is not like a motor vehicle where you just tighten nuts and bolts and the engine is
But there's efficient running of it or inefficient running of it, isn't there?
You cannot attribute it to inefficiency. There are issues that resulted in the current economic challenges that we face. And I'll just walk you through. One is the implementation of a new universal salary structure in which we were trying to achieve equity in public service salaries and wages. In its implementation, there was a wage overrun, and the wage bill ballooned, much higher than was anticipated. So that was one of the causes.
But investors are losing confidence.
No. Investor confidence is high.
Association of Ghana Industry says business confidence dropped from 98 points at the end of last year to 85 in the first quarter of this year. That's a loss of 13 points in business confidence.
Business confidence is still high. I was just going to explain to you. We have economies that have traditionally been based on the export of primary products and import of capital goods. It takes time to diversify those economies. And so our economies are susceptible to the shocks on the international commodity markets. Remember that cocoa is our leading export, and then gold is our second leading export. We've just had an oil and gas industry, a new oil and gas industry. Now, what happened between 2010 and 2012 was that there was a dramatic reduction in price of cocoa. Gold has still not recovered from above $2,000. Gold is selling at $1,200.
But while you make that point, the Center for Policy Analysis says we Ghanaians are giving too many excuses and blaming our problems on the negative impact of external forces. Investors don't trust the way we're managing the economy. That's your own Center for Policy Analysis.
You can pick up many such studies. What I'm saying is...
They're all saying the same thing.
We need to change the basis of our economy. It doesn't take 2 years to do it. I've been in office for 2.5 years. It doesn't take 2.5 years to transform the basis of the economy. And that's why we have presented to Parliament an agenda for transformation, to diversify the economy, to add value addition and not just export primary products, to introduce manufacturing, to expand the services sector, increase agriculture and agriculture.
People are impatient.
People are always impatient.
The majority of your people don't approve of your handling of the economy.
Majority
your own
of people,
Institute of Economic Affairs, 56% of
majority of people in all countries are impatient. Even here in the developed world, in Europe, people are impatient. Everybody is impatient.
56% of respondents believe the current government is managing the economy very badly. Now that has knock-on effects for your elections next year, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not denying the economic challenges we have been through, but the turnaround is happening. And if you look at the reports that we're getting currently, the fiscal consolidation is beginning to take place. The currency is stabilizing. We're going to see inflation. Inflation is slowing, actually. The rate of rise of inflation is slowing. And so that turnaround is happening.
And people are being laid off because of the energy crisis, because there is insufficient electricity. Your Chamber of Commerce and Industry warned in April that 5,000 jobs could be lost by September if the power wasn't fixed. You said, I will fix this energy challenge. You made that promise in February.
I made a promise that I'll fix the challenge in the State of the Nation address in February. And I gave a deadline of the end of this year. Our economy has been growing at a phenomenal pace, average over the last decade, 7%. It's led to an increased demand for electric power. Our demand for electric power is rising at between 10 and 12% per annum.
Why was there no planning for that?
You're asking about my administration, and I'm saying that these are cumulative. These things didn't happen overnight. And so when I say I'll fix it, we are bringing in emergency power, 1,000 megawatts of emergency power in the next few months to be able to catch up with demand.
These are the barges?
Yes, the barges.
From Turkey.
And then we're planning another 4,000 megawatts of power over the next 5 years between now and 2020. And so you cannot blame the shortage of power on one single government or the present. It is cumulative. We had Akosombo Dam, for which we thought we would have power forever. But increasingly, Ghana is growing. Average economic growth rate above 7% over the last decade. And so the demand for power is growing.
How worried are you that corruption, massive corruption, continues to drain the public finances in Ghana? Because this is a huge concern among people in your country, corruption in the economy. Your own Auditor General revealed that in the last year, $1.7 million, which had been earmarked to bring power to local communities, had been spent on 38 luxury cars. How could this happen?
It's supposed to have been a program that was financed by the USXM. And as part of the program, there was provision for vehicles, for monitoring and evaluation, for project vehicles. And so those vehicles were supplied as part of the project. And
the Auditor General didn't approve of this transaction. He said there was no permission for it. It wasn't part.
It was a project that had begun from the previous government, which was inherited by this government. And so at the time this government came into place, it was in its implementational phase.
You think it's okay to spend 1.7 million on luxury cars?
Not luxury cars. The question was about the kind of cars that were purchased. I believe that project cars should be probably 4x4s, rugged enough to be able to go into the countryside. But these decisions had been taken earlier, before I came into government. And so there are things for which we continue to investigate and punish people if they are found guilty of having done anything. I think we need...
I wonder how much punishment there is, because the Anti-Corruption Coalition said in April that despite the Chief Justice setting up a financial tribunal 2 years ago to prosecute public officials for misappropriating money, not a single case had so far been heard. So how much is there really a fight against corruption going on? Not a single case heard.
The focus of the fight against corruption is to strengthen the institutions in order to prevent people from having the opportunity to engage in corruption. And so we're doing a reform of the financial administration system and introducing the GIFMIS, which is a new electronics budget management platform. And that would make it more difficult for people to indulge in corruption.
The Institute of Economic Affairs said in some sections, the public sector, a culture of impunity to embezzle has taken grip. Is that true?
The Auditor General presents his report to Parliament every year. Parliament holds a public sitting and invites the agencies that are cited in the Auditor General's report for misuse of public funds. There is supposed to be an agreement between the Chief Justice and Parliament. This is between the judiciary and the legislature on how persons found culpable in that report are supposed to be handled. I am for expediting prosecution of these people, and I've told the Attorney General, who's the Minister of Justice, to do everything in her power to ensure that people who are found to have deliberately misused government funds are punished. But there's a system that has to be followed. We're no longer in the period where you arrested people and then you went looking for the evidence before you prosecute them. You need to go through the process of producing the dockets, putting them before court
I understand.
and trying them.
I understand,
yes.
but it's not taking place at the moment.
It's happening. It's happening. I know that.
Not to people's satisfaction. People accuse you of paying lip service to reform. There was a headline, November 2013, in the Ghana Web, which said simply, "Looting galore, Auditor General weeps for Ghana."
If you take those reports on an anecdotal and circumstantial, manner, you would you would come to the conclusion that there is an increase in corruption. This government is committed to the fight against corruption, and that's why we are committed to exposing and sanctioning corrupt officials.
Right.
As I speak, people are facing trial for various acts of corruption. There's the case of JIDA, where we have former public officials, facing the courts. There's the case of deliberate insertion of ghost names on the National Service payroll. We have more than 100 officials from the National Service Scheme who are facing different forms of sanctions. And so as and when these things are brought to our attention, government acts on them. And I have told all the investigative agencies that they don't need to wait for my approval to do what they have to do. If they find corruption, they should investigate it. If people are culpable, they should punish them.
Are you also committed to doing something about the critical sectors of Ghana's economy, such as mining, agricultural and fishing sectors, who use the worst forms of child labor? Are you still trying to do something about that? Because the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery visited Ghana a couple of years ago and gave a very depressing picture of slavery, of sexual exploitation, of children as young as 3 being forced to work in order to provide some care for them or their parents. How can that go on?
Sometimes you have to walk through these reports and do a careful analysis of these reports. I mean, how can a child 3 years old be forced to work? I mean, what kind of productivity can you get from a 3-year-old child? In some cases, there are cases of social acculturation.
Well, even if it was a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old.
No, I know. But I'm saying that if you just take these reports on the face value, you might come to conclusions that are not right. Our government is concerned about child labor. We have a Ministry of Gender and Children that is 24/7 looking at issues of child labor. And I'm saying that if you rely on some of these reports that are issued on Africa, some of them are misleading. Why would a 3-year-old child be forced to work? Or a 7-year-old child? What happens is, in some cases, it's social acculturation. Families are involved in some form of work. They don't have a way of leaving the children at home, and so they go to the farm with the child. As the parents are working, the child gets involved in doing something.
I understand,
it's not like the child is being forced to work.
The criticism was that you applied insufficient funds to do something about this very serious issue.
No. Our Ministry on Gender and Children is working not only with budgetary funds, but also in collaboration with international organizations like UNICEF.
So you would contest this report? No adequate measures, it says, have been taken due to insufficient funds. You would contest?
We have been working. For instance, in the cocoa industry, we've been working with the International Cocoa Organization to make sure that children are not used in cocoa farms. And we're making sure that children must go to school rather than accompany their parents to farms.
And the 120 brothels that they say are in Accra, exploiting children sexually, 120 brothels
one of the reasons why parents carry their children along when they engage in whatever occupations they're engaged in is because they did not have daycare centers, because they were not enrolling the children in school. Today,
we're talking sexual exploitation of children.
I was talking about today, more than 90% of children who should be in school are in school. That was not the case before. We have daycare centers where mothers can leave their children.
And the sexual exploitation?
Sexual exploitation and trafficking is not peculiar to Ghana or Africa.
I didn't say it was peculiar, but it was underlined as being a major, major problem.
It is a major problem for us, and it's a major problem that we're dealing with. Children leave their families and get engaged in the sex trade. It happens in the world. It's something of concern in the developed world. There's human trafficking and sex trade in the developed world.
Okay, but I'm asking you about yours.
We must have a commitment to fight it. Yes, and that's why
it needs money to fight it.
What we're doing is we are going in there, we're identifying these young girls most of the cases, what makes them go into this trade is they do not have skills to enter the world of work. And so they are lured into the sex trade. And so what you need to do is to identify them, rehabilitate them. For those who can go back to school, put them back in school. And for those who do not want to go to school, put them in a skills, vocational training, so that when they come back, they have some alternative skills with which to work rather than go into the sex trade. Okay. And so it's a battle we need to continue fighting. And the fact that one report is produced and says that, yes, you found young people in the sex trade means that government is condoning it. No, government is not condoning it. Government is doing everything possible to make sure that we create a life of dignity and prosperity for our people.
I understand. John Mahama, thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Tim.